reason, I love that music. It makes me want to say, book 'em, Dano, just one more time. So I am so proud to be here. You know, NASBA is driven. And I hope when you leave this conference, you think about the report that you saw this great year from the wonderful staff at NASBA. I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, every single NASBA employee buys into the mission of supporting our state boards. They are so driven, as are our volunteers. I hope all of you did have a chance to read the annual report. By the way, did our staff do an excellent job with that annual report this year? I mean, it's just a beautiful document. But more important than the beauty of the document is the story inside. It tells the story of how NASBA is driven. So I hope you have an opportunity to read that, enjoy it, and know that how much work was put into this year by the staff and volunteers. You know, before I go down that path, there's one little discussion I'd like to have with you about our current chair, Galen, who, you know, I've heard David Costello for years talk about the very special relationship between the CEO and the chairman of the board. You know, you heard nice things from Galen about me, but I can tell you, I am an old cop, and when you've gone to battle with someone, you really know their mettle, and this guy has the mettle, folks. I tell you, he is, his leadership, his resolve, unwavering support for NASBA. But I will tell you this, it's always been tempered by fair play. I mean, I can tell you, there were some moments that were a little heated this year, but I know that Galen always tried to get us to that good resolution. So Galen Hansen, what a great year, the hardest working chair that I've ever seen. Galen Hansen, ladies and gentlemen. I also tell you that if you haven't met his wonderful family, I know that Sheila and Colleen had a wonderful year together. His children are magnificent. We're so proud of you. Well, this is called the State of NASBA. It's my job to tell you how we did. Well, you've already heard a lot of reporting about that, but we're going to touch on it a bit more. Indeed, the state of NASBA is good. It's great. We are stronger financially. We're stronger politically. We're more relevant. And we are well positioned for the future. Now, I'm going to do a deeper dive into each of those areas shortly, but first I kind of want to walk through the year a little bit. And when I was talking to Tom Kinney, our Director of Communications, who you all know, I told him, you know, I don't want to talk about transition this year because I've been on the job 2 years. I mean, at some point, you know, I'm just on the job. And so let's just talk about the things that we accomplished last year. And they always give us ideas on our speeches. And he said, you know, a lot of people have talked about reading your president's memos this year in the state board report. He said, why don't you pick out a few of your favorites and kind of walk through some of those stories to tell about your year? So in front of you, I had the 5 articles that I picked out, printed out, and put in front of you because I know they're new members, they're people who maybe didn't get an opportunity to read it, or maybe you're a guest here, so I wanted you to know what we were talking about. The first article was one that probably got the most attention of any state report in a long time, and I talked to David Costello about it. I think he agreed. It was one that just got a lot of attention. And photos on the wall, if you remember, is this discussion about diversity. The lack of women and minorities on the wall of the chairs of NASBA. And I can tell you, I could not believe the number of phone calls, emails, conversations I had around the United States, all of them so supportive of that direction of moving towards more diversity within NASBA. You know, I'm so proud to see Walter Davenport coming in as the vice chair of NASBA. I mean, it's so important that NASBA offers an association of inclusiveness so that women, minorities, everyone feels an equal opportunity to advance to the important roles of leadership of NASBA. So again, I appreciate that so much. We did have a diversity task force. You're going to hear more about that at the conference. But they provided a detailed list of suggestions and opportunities for the chairs of NASBA to look at, and next year, that committee will continue under the leadership of Tyrone Dickerson of Virginia to continue to look at the story of diversity within NASBA. The second article that I wanted to talk about was It's Going to Be a Great Year. And this was an important one to me because the premise of this article was me walking around NASBA as I do, talking to the staff, and having one of my staff members look up at me and say, you know, Ken, it's going to be a great year. You know, the buy-in of our staff and the buy-in of everyone in the organization into the mission of being more focused on you, our state boards of accountancy, has been so critical to our success. Well, it turned out that employee was right. It was a great year. It was the best financial year on record. But more importantly than that, the most supportive state boards. And we'll show those figures again that you saw earlier to kind of point in on that subject. But also, Dan Dustin's been out there, John Johnson, the things that we're doing in state board relations. We have more state boards participating in NASBA than at any time in a long, long time. And that is so important to the things that we wanted to accomplish. We've also worked internally. You know, when Kent gave his report, he said a lot of the gains that we've had financially has to do with controls and efficiency and effectiveness that we've implemented. Well, I can tell you the stabilization of our environment, the fact that we have increased and enhanced our infrastructure are a really critical part of it being a great year. So I so much appreciate you and the staff for all the things that happened this year. You know, the third one was one that maybe was a little less positive, and that was the article called Slanted Remarks. When we got going down the pathway of the discussion of financial framework, where AICPA and NASBA were not quite on the same page, if you remember, at the beginning of that process, there were some slanted remarks out there on blogs and articles. And this story was about a remark that one of our board members heard at a meeting he attended in the Southeast United States. And it made me think a lot about the importance of the relationships that we have at NASBA. You know, NASBA wants to be strong, and we want to be more relevant, and we are stronger, and we are more relevant. But NASBA never wants to be stronger and be somehow thought to be a bully. We're not a bully. We're responsible. We're ethical. We're going to do things right, but we're going to insist on things are done right and the public is protected. I also want to touch on something else you've heard about a bit, and that's the creation of the State Society Relations Committee. Galen gave me credit for that, but certainly it would have not happened without him concurring and funding and getting that going. But that group has been so good for us because we understand the nexus between societies and state boards and how state boards have lost funding, authority. They've been put in umbrella agencies and so watered down in some states. And that's happened under the noses of state societies. And we have to get the two groups working together to make sure state boards remain strong, relevant, stronger and more relevant in the future. So that committee is going to serve a great deed to have that open communication. The next memo is probably my favorite because it's a memo, it stirs me up a bit. An article about my grandfather, my late grandfather, H.S. Wilson, one of the last blacksmiths, a guy with big arms and a bigger smile. The real purpose of that article was it stirs me up a bit. And I want to let you know, it does still stir me up a bit to know that we have state boards out there that are so underfunded, they're unable to handle complaint investigations, to do things in a timely way, return phone calls in a timely way. And we know that there is no excuse for that to occur. I went to meetings where I heard legislatures brag about the fact that they had the lowest license fee in the country, and I knew that their board was cut off at the knees. They didn't even have the basic tools they needed to do their job. So it does stir me up a bit that legislatures and governors do not seem to understand the work of the state boards of accountancy and how important it is that you're strong and relevant. So NASBA is going to help you in that battle. We'll be in any state that you need us. We're willing to take on those challenges. Sometimes you have to ruffle a few feathers to get people's attention to understand you can't accept being such a weak board that you can't do the things that you're legislated to do. So we will be there to help you. It also bothers me that state boards are not able to attend NASBA conferences. Not because of funding, because NASBA will scholarship anyone that wants to come here. I mean, a lot of you are here on a NASBA scholarship. So the reason they can't come is because someone in some bureaucracy has decided that you shouldn't travel to NASBA because of some optical reason or there's some conflict. Well, there can't be a conflict. We're your association and we're all dedicated to public protection. So we're going to take on that challenge as well. If states aren't allowed to travel, we're going to do a deep dive into those states and find out why. All you have to do is ask us to do that. I can tell you we're aware of states that do not allow state board members to travel to conferences, but their attorney general goes to the attorney general conference, the secretary of state goes to the secretary of state conference, the governor goes to the governor's conference, but lo and behold, the state board member can't go to the NASBA conference. We've got to have a conversation about that. We need you here. You need the peer opportunity to get together, and we will take that on. Again, with our state society relationships, maybe they can help us in that regard. And finally, my last president's memo, and again, this is the last one that I wrote this year, and that is the one that, if it comes up here in a minute, is my favorite time of the year. And my favorite time of the year is an article about sort of thinking back over the year. It was a melancholy piece about thinking about the background of NASBA. You know, when I look out in the audience, you know, earlier this week we had the past chairs dinner and meeting. And I look around at the leadership that has led us to where we are today. I look out at David Costello and Lorraine Sachs and others who set a foundation and built a foundation that we've all been able to build upon. You know, new folks in the room, you know, I can tell you, we didn't get to be the great organization we are today on our own. We had a lot of people before us that did a great job. And so that article was saying, we should recognize those people, and I would like to recognize them right now. Let's congratulate our past chairs, our past leaders for the wonderful things they did to get us here today. Thank you. Okay, back to the deeper dive, my word, of the state of NASBA. And I'll go through this relatively quickly. Some of this is, you know, I used to hear that NASBA talks too much about money. Well, what we're doing for you costs money. I mean, you know, I've been asked to parachute into a state next week or the week after next. You know, last minute flights cost a lot of money, but we have the wherewithal that we can do those things for you. We can do the emergent legal assistance you need, the support in legislatures, the things you do, so we have to be well funded. You know, we talked about where NASBA has gone. In 2012, $28.3 million. I can remember David Costello and I talking about, well, if we could ever hit $25 million of unrestricted net assets, NASBA will have arrived. 2013, we took that number to $32.9 million, and we're projecting in 2014 to go to $35.2 million. Now, some of you will say, why does NASBA need that much money? Well, for you state boards that are well-funded and control your funds, you probably have 1-2 times your appropriation in a fund budget that will get you through rough patches, a major case, some anomaly, some physical crisis. And NASBA's operating this budget this year is $27.1 million. That's a lot of money, folks. Our operational costs, $27.1 million. You pay us in dues something around $400,000. So all of the rest of the money that NASBA generates to support our state boards, we make in our business opportunities. So again, we're a very strong business that takes the money we make and spends it over on here to our nonprofit side, which is the State Boards of Accountancy. So I want you to understand and appreciate we are trying to grow our wherewithal. We are really close now where we have enough cash in the bank, where we have about a 1-year budget, operation budget in cash in the bank, and that's exactly where I want NASBA to be. You know, when you look at that 24% though, it was up there on Kent's slide as well, but I hope you saw the correlation. We had a 24% increase in revenue, but if you can go to the next slide, guys, we have increased what we spend on you by 29%. So we have increased the spending on state boards at a greater ratio than we've increased the financial production of NASBA. The fact that we're able to spend $6 million in direct support to state board is unprecedented. The legal support that John Johnson and his group are able to provide, I see the legislative support, the things that Dan Dustin's doing out there, a lot of our staff are out there doing the things for state boards every single day. That is a capability that didn't exist a short time ago, so I hope you take advantage of it. If you need something from NASBA, we're going to say yes almost every time. The only time we've said no in the last year was a request for IT support where someone asked us to build an IT system for licensure. And the reason we said no is we don't have that capability yet. But if we get to that capability, the answer will turn to yes. But right now, we're not going to write checks or make promises that we can't keep. I want to talk a little bit about accountability. You know, there's 2 words you're always going to hear from Ken Bishop when I'm in front of the room: accountability and relevancy. Accountability is so important. You know, NASBA is a great organization, but we're a great organization because of you, and we're only great if you trust us completely. If we're going to be your collective voice, if we're going to represent you, we can only do that if you have complete trust in NASBA. And one of the elements of trust is complete transparency. You know, we live within our mission, we live within our strategic plan, and I want to remind you that the strategic plan is now a member-driven strategic plan and a member-developed strategic plan. But we are also really, lean and mean is kind of the wrong word, but we are maximizing our efficiency. We're improving our capability, and our capability is so that we can do more things for you. Just one example is that we are spending a lot of money right now trying to identify or improve a CPE tracking tool so that all state boards that want to can have an automated tool from NASBA at no cost that will greatly enhance your ability to audit CPE in your state, something that's always been an issue for state boards of accountancy. We had a pilot with Missouri. It worked very well. We are now piloting a second state in Tennessee. Because the logistics is very close to us, it helps us make sure we get the kinks out of it, and we're going to have some kind of a product for you in the future. Again, not ready to make the promise yet. It's got to work, but it's looking very positive. So we're continuing looking at resources and tools that we can provide you to make you and your jobs better, more relevant. Because again, if NASBA is more relevant, you will be more relevant as state boards of accountancy. Again, talking about relevance, again, one of the things that I've learned about relevance, it is that word trust. First of all and foremost, we have to have the trust of our members. But we also have to have trust of the relationships that we deal with. The FASB, the GASB, the FAF, the PCC, the SEC, the PCOB, the myriad of people, many of their leaderships are here or have been in front of you the last few days. Well, those kinds of trusted relationships don't happen overnight, and they don't happen without a lot of communication, a lot of opportunity to get together, to know each other, to work together. And we have worked so hard the last year to continue to enhance those relationships. Galen and Colleen Conrad have been at so many different meetings, so that will continue with Carlos, Colleen, myself. We are out there continually trying to build a relationship. You heard us say that we're having annual meetings with the PCOB. We recently met with the Mexicans, the Contradores. Gail and I are flying there. As soon as we leave this conference, we're flying to Mexico to meet with the Mexican Contradores in their annual conference to maintain that relationship. We have a trusting relationship with Canada. You saw the huge contingent of Canadians that are attending our meeting. You're going to hear some exciting things from Kevin tomorrow when he presents to you or this afternoon maybe, what's happening in Canada. I can tell you that some of you fear the word mobility. We've been very successful. By the way, that reminds me of something I wanted to say. Where's the Y, folks? There you are, some of you. We are in beautiful Y, the land of beautiful sunsets, beautiful shores, and no mobility. So I just wanted to make sure, Lori, I'm sorry, I had to tee that up one more time. We still want to focus on Hawaii and get you this being the last state to have mobility. But mobility for individuals has worked very well. There have just been a handful of cases of complaint investigations, and NASBA is working with states to make sure that the right things happen if indeed there is a mobility complaint. I can tell you that we started about 3 or 4 years ago talking to Canada about a possibility of international or North American mobility with Canadians. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take years. But we need to begin to have the conversation of what the world is going to look like 10 years from now. When you have my job, when you have a leadership job anywhere, you don't want to be looked back upon 5 or 10 years down the road of who was the dinosaur that sat in that seat that wasn't willing to open doors and look at new opportunities. And so we are not afraid to look at those opportunities, but we have to exercise the diligence, do it right, and I know Kevin will absolutely amen that when he gives his remarks later. I also want to talk a little bit about firm mobility as we go into the important things that happened this year. But first, let me go out with probably the biggest issue. You've heard Galen, you've heard Bill, lots of different people talk about the FRF for SMEs. It was so important that NASBA stood up when we saw something that we believe could put the public in harm's way. We didn't say it was horribly bad. We said that we have a list of fatal flaws, and I am so appreciative of my counterpart at the AICPA, Barry Milan Son's willingness, and his staff, Sue Coffey, their senior vice president, our vice president, Dan Dustin, worked very hard together, as well as a lot of volunteers, to close that gap of differences. But as Galen pointed out, in a trusting relationship, you can have disagreements, and you can come to resolution, and you can make things better and stronger. So that important exercise, I believe, is a positive outcome for both organizations, and it certainly is better for public protection than where we started. I also want to talk about the release of the exposure draft that's out there. The definition of a test, I think you heard it loud and clear, but let me say it as succinctly as I can, is NASBA has been very supportive of the definition of a test change because we believe it is a strong argument for public protection. If a consumer out there is relying on a financial report that's using CPA language, whether it has to do with IT security, whatever it is, we believe that a CPA should issue that report and it should come from a CPA firm. That is not anti-competitive. It is not to push back against anyone else. It's just if there is CPA language, we believe a CPA firm should issue that report. So we strongly support that. But I want to go to one that's been a little more questionable, and that's the firm mobility. And Galen said I would take a little deeper dive on this one. You know, firm mobility, if you read my last State Board report, is not new. It's been around since, it's been talked about since 2004, almost a decade of discussion. I've heard some allegations of lack of due diligence and something we're trying to rush through. Well, no, it's been out there for a long, long time. In fact, some of you were on the board of NASBA in 2006 when the NASBA board and the AICPA board unanimously voted to adopt firm and individual mobility. I played a role in taking on the chair of the Mobility Task Force of saying, are we sure we're ready on the firm piece? Because at that time, there was not much description of a substantially equivalent firm. And what do I mean by that? 2006, about half the states didn't have mandated peer review, for example. There was a lot more disparity in the firm ownership laws, the percentage of ownership laws, firm names. There were a lot of things out there that were really, really disparate among the state boards. And to suddenly allow a firm to go into a second state that required peer review, but the visiting firm didn't have peer review, was not acceptable to me as a regulator. And very graciously, the AICPA board, the NASBA board revisited at that time and decided to kick the firm piece out of the exposure draft back in 2006. Now we come to today. There's been a continuing dialogue for the last couple of years. We have several states. Let me tell you a little story about what happened. When the 2006 exposure draft came out, in the gap of time between when it came out and when we decided the firm mobility piece wasn't correct, several states had already adopted the first version of the exposure draft. Therefore, they had implemented firm mobility. They weren't very happy when they heard that NASBA pulled the rug out from underneath them and said, wait a minute, our CPAs don't get the benefit of firm mobility, but people can come into our state. And we promised those states that we would go back and revisit it. Well, currently there are about 16 states that in effect have firm mobility. And they have said to NASBA, you made a promise, are you going to keep it? But there is a difference here. NASBA is not going to come around and try to convince states or be persuasive to pass firm mobility. We're going to provide very good language that works well in the Uniform Accountancy Act that will allow you to implement firm mobility in an equivalent way, where the language is substantially equivalent across the country, any state that wants to adopt it. But if you don't want to adopt it, there's not going to be any persuasiveness. And that's not just coming from NASBA, that's also coming from the AICPA. When Barry Melancon addressed council meeting last week in LA, I like a word he used. We are going to approach firm mobility surgically. If a state wants it, we will go in and provide the resources to pass it, and if they don't, we're going to leave you alone. So that's a promise from me, it's a promise from NASBA. So if you're concerned about firm mobility, if you are not ready for it, understand me, NASBA will not be there trying to persuade anyone to move that direction. If you want to, we will be there to help you pass it. We think it's good law, but again, we're not going to twist arms. You just saw Alfonso Alexander. I'm so grateful to the great work that Alfonso and David do in the Center for Public Trust. But I want to touch on one thing that's important about it. NASBA is always going to be concerned about ethics. In fact, it was a key element of our strategic plan. When the members created the strategic plan, they said NASBA has to remain focused on ethics, and we're going to do that. But we also decided that we already have a great vehicle. The Center for Public Trust is a great vehicle for us to rely on to make sure that we had that strong ethical underpinning. You know, our job is public protection, and one of the things that we do in NASBA is anytime that we have any product, service, or idea, we try to link that to our mission statement. How can we justify the money we're spending, the time we're spending, the resources we're spending? And I can tell you, I think there is a public protection argument that says that if we take young students who are becoming business leaders and accountants, and we give them a good ethical underpinning in their training, in their education in college, that they're going to go out and be better CPAs, better accountants, better businessmen that are going to help us in our responsibilities to public protection. And I tell you, it does one more thing. It takes some of the brightest students in the country, and it tells them who NASBA is, and it tells them the integrity of the CPA profession, which we believe will attract a lot of people to that profession that we're so very, very proud of. We also award people still, we didn't talk a lot about this morning, but CPT is also known to reward people who do good things. The awards we give for ethical leadership, I know that's very important to some of the supporters of Center Public Trust. And again, I'm so proud of the work that Alfonso and David have done, and now having 18 chapters, that's an amazing accomplishment in a short period of time. So I want to end on this. The future of NASBA certainly looks bright. You heard some statistics this week about the CPA exam. That is primarily our biggest piece of business. You know, the pipeline is full. We did hear a wonderful education about the presentation on the threats of education, but the existing pipeline of accounting programs around the country is packed. And some of the highest bars of entry ever, so some of the brightest students that have ever been in the accounting school programs. The fact that there is a record number, 82,000 accounting graduates last year, CPA exam hitting high numbers, record number of new hires. You heard Bill talk about the over 40,000 hires in the profession, and the fact that over 2 million people have now set for the computer-based test since we launched it 9 years ago. The international piece is doing very well. 18,000 international candidates set this last year for the CPA exam. Again, every time an international student applies to the CPA exam, they are understanding who NASBA is. They are learning about the United States State Board system. They are interested in becoming CPAs, and they are making sure that NASBA, state boards, the CPA USA is considered and known as a premier credential all around the world, which we believe is important to public protection. The last thing I want to talk about is something that I know Carlos is going to touch on this. You know, there are so many potential future leaders out here in this room today. You know, what we know now is to continue the momentum and the progress and the things that we want to do in the future, we need to identify the leaders. We need to get them focused. We need to get them involved in NASBA, and we need to get you on a pathway towards future leadership. We are so blessed to have Diane Rubin on the PCC and Billy Axon chairing the PCC, to have David Bout to be the chair of GASB, all former NASBA chairs. But who are the Diane Rubins and the Billy Axons and the David Bouts of the future? They're probably you. So we want to help you get there. If there's anything I want you to remember when you leave this conference, and it was the theme that we put up all around here, is that if you're on an elevator, if you're in an airplane, if you go back to your state boards and they go, man, how are things at NASBA? What I want you to say, ladies and gentlemen, is NASBA is driven. Thank you very, very much.